we've seen Russia launch what looks like to be a bit of a minor offensive in the Kharkiv region. Could you provide us with some updates about what this is and whether the goals are to permanently liberate Kharkiv, or is this simply just a measure to try and distract and weaken troops and pull them from fighting in the Donetsk against Russian forces?
Look, Russia has been engaged in a war of attrition against Ukraine ever since the initial gambit failed. The initial gambit of this conflict was to come in boldly, come in fast, and to compel Ukraine to get to the negotiating table. Militarily, they accomplished what they needed to accomplish. Within a week, Ukraine was at the negotiating table, and in less than a month, or a little more than a month, Ukraine was signing a peace deal. I mean, this was, from a military standpoint, the Russian operation was brilliant because it compelled Ukraine to go to the negotiating table. Unfortunately for Ukraine, Russia, and the world, the Ukrainians walked away from that peace agreement. Since that time, Russia has been engaged in a war of attrition against the Ukrainians that is designed to achieve two primary goals. One is demilitarization, and this is important. People need to understand that. Stop looking at a map and saying, aha, the Russians haven't moved very much. The map hasn't changed. Ukraine is winning. That's not what it's about, ladies and gentlemen. At least that's not what it's been about for the last nearly year and a half. It's about killing Ukrainians. It's about destroying Ukrainian equipment. And on this, Russia has been tremendously successful. This war of attrition has been designed to grind not just Ukraine down, but NATO down, the collective West, which has poured hundreds of billions of dollars of military assistance into this conflict. And on this front, Russia has achieved its objective. They have worn the Ukrainians down to where they have no more manpower reserves. Ukraine right now is talking about an emergency mobilization of personnel. And anybody who's been involved in military recruiting knows this. You have to keep recruiting. You have to keep training no matter what, because as troops rotate out, as people retire, as people say, hey, I've done my 3 years, I've done my 5 years, I'm leaving, you have to have people behind them in a pipeline who are already fully trained to plug in to maintain combat effectiveness. What happened with Ukraine is, first of all, their army has been destroyed at least 3 times and rebuilt 3 times. Each time you rebuild that army, you lose the experience. The first army that fought against the Russians in 2022 had 7 years of building experience at the hands of NATO training. NATO trainers were training them in Western Ukraine. This army was expanding, and it was a very well-equipped, well-led, experienced army. That army was destroyed. NATO rebuilt it. The troops that came in to replace weren't as effective as the original troops because instead of 7 years experience, they had a few months of experience. They were killed. They were destroyed. The next army that was built to replace them had even less experience, weeks of experience, not months. They have all been killed. What's left now is nothing. There's no troops coming in. They're hijacking people off the streets. They're throwing them in the front lines with 6 days of training. These people surrender. They die. They get wounded, but they're not combat effective, and they don't have enough of those people. Russia is killing Ukrainians in excess of 800, 1,000, sometimes 1,500 a day. The Ukrainians aren't recruiting at that level. Russia, on the other hand, is recruiting 30 to 40,000 men a month, volunteers who are saying, we want to serve in the special military operation. The Russian military is growing. This is simple military math. This war of attrition has worn the Ukrainians down to next to nothing. They have no more equipment. They have no more manpower. So what Russia has done is, after stressing the Ukrainians to the limit, now they pop in at Kharkiv with 50,000 men. And the Ukrainians don't have anybody to defend there. So they're stripping everything they can away from the primary line of contact up to Kharkiv. Meanwhile, the Russians continue to advance on the primary line of contact in Zaporizhia and Donetsk, and they're making gains. The forces in Kharkiv are being destroyed. And trust me, sometime in the near future, the Russians are going to appear somewhere else, and there's nobody left to get them. The Ukrainians are going to have to strip away more, and they get thinner and thinner and thinner. And then you have total collapse. I was told by a Russian general back in January that you're going to see dramatic changes in the map of the battlefield in the month of May. We're midway through May, and I think we see that that's happening. And he said that he anticipates that the Ukrainians won't be able to continue to resist past midsummer, the end of summer, that this war will be over this year. And I think that's what we're seeing.
And one more quick question for you. We saw recently that the Russian security services, I believe, put Zelensky on their wanted list. And we also saw the Russian services come out and say that the United States is looking to replace Volodymyr Zelensky as the leader of Ukraine. What do you make of these developments? And do you think we could soon be seeing an end to the Zelensky government?
I don't know. I think there's an element of information warfare taking place here. I think that the Russians are going into overdrive to undermine Zelensky. They're putting pressure on him on the battlefield at a time he's politically weak overseas, and I think they're just trying to create an environment where confidence is evaporates in Zelensky. They're making the case that on May 20th he no longer is the legitimate leader of Ukraine because he did not have a presidential election or a parliamentarian election. To be honest, it's none of Russia's business. It's the internal political problem of Ukraine. But Russia is playing a political game here. What's important is that Russia has put him on a list, a wanted list. This is a signal that they're not going to negotiate with this man. You don't negotiate with criminals. By putting him on this list, it basically eliminates Zelensky as being part of the solution, whatever the solution is. And that, again, puts more pressure on the Ukrainians to find a leader to replace Zelensky, a leader that will be more realistic in what Ukraine can expect at a negotiating table. The Russians have said, we're open to negotiations, but it has to be based on reality, the reality of the battlefield, the reality of the political situation. Zelensky formula that he's put out there is totally unrealistic, and this is why the war continues. I think the Russians are doing everything they can to help Zelensky exit stage right so that a new leader comes in, one who's prepared to do what is necessary to bring this war to an end.
Well, we'll have to wait and see, as always. Scott Ritter, thank you so much for joining me here. Do you have any exciting announcements, and where can people follow along with your work?
Well, I mean, I think the most exciting announcement I found out that you and I are going to be on a panel together in St. Petersburg at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. So I'm looking forward to that. But I will be going to Russia to attend the forum, and then I'll be spending another 40 days traveling around Russia, gathering information and trying to show to America and the rest of the West that there is a Russia outside of Moscow, outside of St. Petersburg, that it is a vibrant society, a thriving society, and populated by people that are just like you and me, Jackson. People who just want peace, just want to live, just want to enjoy the things in life. That all we have to do is knock off the Russophobic nonsense, and believe it or not, peace can break out all over. And so I appreciate the work that you're doing. And like I said, I look forward to seeing you in St. Petersburg.
It's going to be a great trip. Very exciting stuff coming up soon. Scott Ritter and yours truly going to be in St. Petersburg and all around Russia, as you hear. All right, Scott, thank you so much for joining us here again.